Hey Robin, thanks very much for coming on the Nikos show today. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, Nick. The weather's getting chilly, but like you, I live in the mountains too, so we all notice.
Before we started recording, I had a t-shirt on, but I decided I need to do a hoodie here and don't break the floor. So
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're living in a situation right now where you've got a lot of military experience, so we could go quite far down the military road here, but such dangerous times. I mean, I read some articles like we're at a point that's even more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis, because in the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviets had a community of leaders, whereas some people say now it's just one man with a button. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's hyperbole. I think that the media, the biggest failing with the modern media is it loves to sensationalize and speculate and heighten people's base emotions. So they like to frighten people because it sells product. I think that we always live in dangerous times. We've always lived in dangerous times. And these are particularly heightened at the moment because this particular war is on the European doorstep. And that makes people more frightened. But what makes people most frightened is the media. And rather than concentrating on news, they concentrate on speculation, on opinion, on prophets of doom, rather than actually what's happening. I understand why people are scared. There are good reasons to be seriously concerned over what Vladimir Putin is doing. But the idea that he can simply press a button is a false one. There's a protocol in Russia, just like there's a protocol in every other nuclear-powered country. And you've got to ask yourself, does somebody as manipulative and cunning as Vladimir Putin want to actually commit suicide? He doesn't. He wants to hold on to power. What's his interest? To hold on to power. That was why he invaded Ukraine. He wanted a short military victory. He wanted to impose his own puppet government on the people of Ukraine. And he wanted to raise his popularity stakes. He failed on every front.
He seemed to have drunk his own Kool-Aid and his own intelligence. If you have such a misused and maybe corrupt intelligence, how can you even trust that to do such a big commitment?
The thing about a bully is or a violent person goes into a conflict with a plan, and they expect that plan to go exactly as they've imagined it. If I walk up to somebody that I don't know in a bar and decide that I'm going to beat them up, I don't for 1 minute imagine that I'm going to hit that person. He's going to turn around and beat the hell out of me.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the same at the international level with Vladimir Putin. He had a plan. His plan didn't work. And he kept going on he kept digging the same hole. He kept painting himself further and further into the corner. And he wouldn't let go. Had he withdrawn his troops right at the very beginning, it would have been a bit of egg on his face. But he would have been able to say, well, we've shown them now. We've taught them a lesson. But he didn't. He's persisted and he's persisted and he's persisted. And as time's passed, the Western democracies have clubbed together, have funded and looked after the brave fighters of Ukraine and given them what they need. And now there is no way that Vladimir Putin can win this military campaign.
I mean, history favours the defenders, and when he invaded in 2014, started the war then, as I was corrected quite sternly when last time I was in Ukraine, when I said the war started this year in February, no, but 2014. So Ukraine's had 8 years to prepare their defences, and then you just do a botched campaign. So not rational.
Well, history really supports or favours high technology. The nation with the highest technology and the most money usually wins. But you've also got to combine that with the will of the people to fight and good military strategy and good highly trained generals and soldiers. And Ukraine had spent the time since the Crimean invasion by Russia preparing their armed forces, developing them into a very different army to the Russian army, updating them, upgrading them, using Israel, Canada, USA, UK, France to actually teach their officers how to run modern warfare. and how to use modern technology. So they were so much better positioned when really a 1970s army still using World War II tactics poured over their border and thought that they were going to do what they did to Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And these very, very good soldiers with very, very good anti-tank weapons simply stopped them in their tracks. On top of that, the generalship was absolutely appalling. The logistics were appalling. They poured an army down a single road towards Kyiv in the winter, where they couldn't deploy off the road, so they get stuck in the mud. I mean, that is really simplistic. The Ukrainians have got a wonderful saying: we're very lucky because they're so stupid.
If you study history, it seems like stable dictatorships, and when I say stable, I mean long tenure, they have to really clamp down and control the military, which in a sense hamstrings the military, so that when they do go into combat, they only operate in much less effectiveness,
Western democracies have a weakness, which is when they're at peace, they reduce their defenses. They see them as a unnecessary cost, and it takes them an awfully long time to club together, to realize there's a big threat and get back into the game. And NATO had become fat and flabby. It had reduced and feminized its army. And I'm not talking about women being in the army. I'm talking about the actual attitude of the soldiers, to the point where they'd almost forgotten how to fight. Fortunately, the Ukrainians hadn't, because they were depending on technology. Well, the war in Ukraine has proved beyond any doubt that you can have the technology, but you still need to have the highly skilled infantryman, artilleryman, tank driver. You can have the drone flyers as well. That's wonderful stuff. It's changed the concept of modern warfare, but you've still got to have the boots on the ground.
Mm-hmm. I remember when the invasion happened in 2014, there seemed to have been more reports of soldiers lacking helmets and armor and tourniquets, etc. But I think now it's been better overall. Would you say that's the case?
There was, I think what happened with 2014 with the Russia annexing Crimea was that the Western powers had painted themselves into the corner. They had reduced their military effectiveness. They did have a huge vested interest in Russian gas and oil. And consequently, they didn't feel that it was worth defending a sovereign state that had been invaded and had some of its territory captured, and risk war for the in exchange for that oil and energy security.
Mm-hmm. So what's different now then? The scale of the invasion?
The difference now was, I think the big difference, the big catalyst that changed all this was that Ukraine fought. Ukraine fought and they stopped Russia. And once they had fought back and stopped the bully, then the crowd joined in. Then the watchers joined in, and they saw that there was a potential for Ukrainian victory. Mm-hmm. And that was the big change. There are people that get in touch with me almost daily from other conflicts, people from Iran, people from Azerbaijan, Armenia, and other places. And they say, why don't you write about this? Why don't you write about this? And I say, because I can only fight one battle and there's only one me. And so I've got to concentrate on this particular one right now. However, the difference between your campaign and this campaign is that these people have fought back and they've stopped the Russian army. That doesn't mean other people haven't fought. They have. The Georgians, the Chechens, they all fought. But that I think is the big change here. The other big change was that, and it's always when it's in your street, in your neighborhood. Ukraine had become a developing democracy. It was working its way towards becoming a free, elected, uninhibited democracy. And consequently, It wasn't NATO that was a threat to Russia. It was democracy that was knocking on the door. It was democracy that was a threat to Putin. NATO's a defensive organization. It has very, very strict rules. However, it was democracy knocking on the door. Freedom was knocking on the door of Russia. And that was the big threat.
I can't imagine what it's like in Russia when you see Russians stealing washing machines and putting them on their tanks. I mean, it costs a lot of fuel just to move tanks. So, like, okay, is fuel that embodied there that they can afford to drive tanks with washing machines on top of them and things like that?
When you talk about Russia, I've got to remember it goes all the way from Western Europe all the way across to Japan.
Yeah.
And there are millions of people who live in abject poverty in that Middle Asian area. And so a washing machine is a gift of a washing machine, a second-hand washing machine is a bit like somebody giving you a brand new Lamborghini.
Mhm.
And so you can see the value to those individual people, many who haven't learned to read and write. So when you come to the situation of why do soldiers not make the equation between 700 gallons of tank fuel compared to a washing machine, doesn't really enter their thinking at all.
Yeah, we just hope that once this war ends, that those minorities that were brainwashed to come and steal washing machines and well, you can't forgive those people that have raped and murdered and stuff like that. But
No,
just the petty theft stuff that you got to like. This is going to be years of like you can't imagine what it's like to grow up in a place like that and be exposed to propaganda all
yeah.
your life, you know. But
Well, all soldiers are tempted by the booty of war, and they're all tempted to grab and loot when they fought their way through a particular campaign, and nobody's going to know. And the difference is made by the leadership, all the way from the lance corporal all the way up to the general, and the standards set from the top to the bottom about bad behaviour. And although you can never eliminate all bad behaviour, you can impose a system and a philosophy that eliminates most of it. But Vladimir Putin's philosophy is based on a mafia gang boss. I mean, he's executing his oligarchs, his generals are disappearing conveniently. Anybody that opposes him. And that message travels all the way down to the ordinary Russian on the street. If my boss can break the law, then why should I?
seems like there's a lot of layers between Putin and the bottom soldier, but in Ukraine it seems like there's not that many layers between Zelenskyy and the private on the ground, you know, and that makes whole things a little more efficient.
Yeah, President Zelenskyy has impressed and surprised the whole of the world in his ability to lead his country in a time of war, to motivate his people, to be connected to his people in the fight. It's an amazing thing to think that he was an actor who acted as a leader of Ukraine with integrity, and then he became the real thing. And it sounded like something straight out of a movie. But when you've got somebody with high moral standards and integrity, who's supported by other people with those same belief systems, then you end up eventually with an unstoppable force. His people are fighting because they believe in what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their land, their freedom, their families, their homes. The Russians are just unwilling conscripts, and they just want to go home, and nobody will let them, and they're frightened of being shot if they disobey orders. Many of them are surrendering. Those that remain are incompetent. Their aeroplanes are crashing. Their trucks are getting lost. Their soldiers are not really soldiers. They're just the local bootmaker who's been put in a green uniform. And that isn't a soldier.
I think many of the Russian soldiers are sort of in the position of Germans in World War II, where there's a sort of opportunity cost between, okay, should I do what's right and moral versus and risk losing everything in my life versus just going there and, you know, maybe surrendering or just hopefully not going to the front. You know, Jordan Peterson is quite good about basically saying that a lot of people in World War II would have been Nazis, you know, and based
Yeah,
on the circumstances. So
I agree with that. I mean, I'm a great fan of Jordan, and I watch his lectures, and I've learned a great deal from listening to him. And I agree with, I would think, about more than 90% of what he actually proposes. I've got his books, and I really like what he says. And bear in mind, I was a soldier from the age of 15. a full-time soldier in the British Army from the age of 15, a paratrooper.
15. Gee.
Yeah, yeah. The school leaving age was 15 in 1972. And I loved being a soldier. And had I been a German 15-year-old in 1937, 38, I would have wanted to have been one of the elites. I would have wanted to have been an SS soldier, wear those amazing uniforms, be seen by all the girls as you know, the ultimate human being. And and then when you're thrust into a moral choice, you're controlled by the peer group and you're controlled by the authority figures.
Yeah.
There's some marvelous experiments about how people are prepared to do terrible things, providing it's approved by authority. And we're all subject to that. But as we get older, if we keep working at developing ourselves, we actually become better at questioning people's motives and saying, "Hang on, why are you doing that?" Or standing alone from the group and saying, "Whoa, stop! This is wrong." But that takes time and that takes training. We're taught by our parents first, our school teachers second, and then our peer groups and our big brothers and the older teenagers. And that's what teaches us the difference between right and wrong. It doesn't just happen. And what's happened with Russia is they've done the same thing as the Nazis did in Germany in the 20s and 30s. They've trained a whole nation to be obedient to the glorious leader. And the glorious leader is corrupt.
Yeah, we're basically separated from being SS soldiers by time and location and parents. You know, it's a sobering thought to think, what would I do in a situation, and what would I do if society fell apart? What would I stand for? You know.
Well, what would you do if somebody tells you to do something wicked and evil and they hold a gun to your head at the same time?
Nobody knows until it happens, right?
And then so when people sit there in judgment of people, especially the lower echelons, and say, you should have done this, you should have done that, they very rarely put themselves in that person's shoes and imagine it. And that's not to excuse people who commit atrocities and rape and murder like they did in Bucha. That was a disgraceful and disgusting act, a really big war crime by the Russians because they were petulant and they were defeated and they were having to retreat from Kyiv.
And may they be hunted down the rest of their lives like the Mossad did with the Nazis.
Well, they hunted down the Nazi leadership more than anything. Most of the lower ranks in the German army during the Second World War were finally just absolved. And even those that were captured and taken and sent to prison had very short sentences, if you research it. Except for, who was it? It was in Hesse, except for Hesse, Rudolf Hess, who spent the rest of his life in Spandau prison.
He never got out?
No, he died there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think it was Pierce, the architect. He got out after 10 years or something, I think. Spear,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name.
Speer, yeah.
I've watched all the Discovery Channel documentaries about World War II.
Yeah, Albert Speer, yeah.
Yeah, Albert Speer, yeah.
He got off because he was clever. He was as guilty as the rest, but he was extraordinarily clever.
Yeah, Hitler wanted Speer to make him a massive... Did you ever see those designs that the Nazis actually had for the new Berlin? The dimensions were insane, you know?
That's right. It's Germania.
Germania,
yeah. But symbols are something that send great messages to people. We use flags. In Britain, we use our monarchy. But football, the football scarf and the shirt and so on, they're all symbols and they send messages about who we are and what we do. Even the clothes we wear, they're symbolic. And building big structures to be remembered by and to represent your philosophy and your system of government carry a great deal of weight because they last through history.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's say get back to you, Rob, and you've got I've got some information here about your life. You were selected for the SAS, qualified on January 7th, 1979, and that was I think a 2 or 3 year process of grueling probation and 40-mile hikes with backpacks and things like that. And then you obviously your probably best known for the Iranian hostage siege. And then you had some conflict after the Falklands War with some of your commanders, and man, I could talk about stuff for hours. I don't even know where to start.
Well, I guess I would plug my book, Fighting Scared, which is my autobiography, which has got most of the story from my childhood up to the age of about 40. But I've had an awful lot of interesting things in my life. I mean, the bit about SAS selection is that it lasts a year. I mean, it's nothing like the nonsense that we see on television where people associate some kind of fitness course or television program with SAS selection. It lasts a year. The first month is in the mountains, and then you have another 2 months of continuation training, part of which is in the jungle. And then you do combat survival instructors course, and then you do basic parachuting, and then you get badged and join your squadron, but you're on probation for 6 months. And in that time, you have to learn a personal skill and a troop skill. And at the end of that 12 months, you then get qualified and badged as an SAS soldier. And then you're reassessed 2 years later. So there's no letter, there's no room for failure, which is a shame because everybody learns more from failure than they do from success. And yes, I had some conflict with some of my commanders who got stitched up for something I didn't do. And so rather than let them take control of me, I simply purchased my discharge from the army when I was 28 and moved on, 27, and moved on. Quite bitter at the time, but it actually freed me up to explore my true potential. I mean, I went to university as an undergrad when I was 56 years old and graduated when I was 59. And the great lesson I got from that was nobody wants to sit next to their grandpa at school.
Okay. So you keep yourself in quite good shape because not having gone through so many years in the military, you've probably survived some major injuries or.
Well, I had some military injuries, but I'm not in great shape because 3 years ago I got bladder cancer, and so I had to have my bladder removed. And I spent the last 3 years gradually recovering from that, which was the reason I went to university, because I broke my neck. I broke my neck 10 years ago, and I couldn't teach martial arts anymore. And so I thought, well, what can I do while my neck heals? And so I decided to do something else. And so I went and studied English Lit with creative writing. And since then, I've written 4 more books. So it's when life hits you in the nose, you have to change direction. It's no good crying your eyes out. You have to think, right, I can't do that anymore. What can I do now? But I try to walk every day. I try to swim when I can. I love swimming, and we'll see where it goes. I'll keep going until God gets me.
How did you break your neck?
Training with my oldest son, Alex, in karate. Not as amazing, not as dramatic as it sounds. He was holding an impact pad for me to hit. And I was talking to a class and I hit it when my neck was in the wrong position when I made contact with the pad. And it broke one of the processes on my spine at the back.
And you were striking the pad with what part of your body?
With my right fist. And
that broke your neck?
Caused a twisting action like that. It's called a torque injury. And it broke a small piece off one of the processes. So I recovered, but it made my neck quite weak.
You're making me worried now because I do a lot of punching maneuvers with various instruments.
Well, I don't train in martial arts anymore because of the weakness in my neck. But I'm sure if I did decide to punch something, it would still have some of the real technique still in there, enough to do the job.
And were you doing martial arts for a long time before that?
Only 30 years.
So that's really scary. I'm not in the martial arts. I just like to move around a lot, like Ido Portal, and I try different movements, like Thai punching with a dumbbell in my hand slowly and seeing what the muscle feels like. But I need to. Anyway.
Well,
I was just,
the fighting in martial arts is applied physics, and it's teaching your body to operate using those applied physics, so that all your potential energy is released into 2 square inches on the point of impact. And but there's far more to it than that, because martial arts, as opposed to martial sports, is about making yourself strong and disciplined so that you can avoid conflict. And if you do happen to come across the idiot who forces it upon you, then it's usually over before that person realizes it's a fight.
yeah, because the more you learn about self-defense and fighting, the less you want to be involved in that, just because you're aware of the injuries that can happen. So if
Well,
something does come up, you have to just basically explain to the person, "Hey, look, I really don't want this." But
yeah, when good, decent people brought up with good, decent backgrounds, and that's got nothing to do with money, very often don't have any experience of real violence. And so when it confronts them, they go into shock and they think they've done something wrong. And they haven't done anything wrong. What the problem is, they don't know how to deal with this kind of behavior. And I was a victim of bullying a lot when I was a young man. And I had to learn, I never learned to understand the mind of a bully, but I understood how to deal with them. And that held me in good stead as time passed. So you learn martial arts to fight idiots, not to fight martial artists.
and how did you deal with the bullies?
Well, there have been occasions where I would simply go quiet and let them talk themselves out. There's times when you weren't given that option because they'd come in swinging, and then there had been about, I don't know, half a dozen, somewhere between half a dozen, a dozen times in my life where I've had to put somebody on the floor. And on other occasions, I've actually walked away and thought, well, if this person's going to give me the opportunity to walk away, then I will. But it's a dangerous thing to do, because very often they'll come up and take you from behind. So it's being aware of what extremely violent people can and will do, understanding what they're up to when they get close to you and they're looking to put their head on your nose, understanding what they mean when they say, "What are you looking at?" Because their intention, they've already stepped over the violence marker. And you've got a choice, which is either run away or fight. It's much easier to fight if you know how to. It's easy to walk away confidently without feeling that you've betrayed your honor and dignity if you know how to as well.
Yeah, I advocate now that basically exercise is a lifestyle choice, and it's like a everyday thing, because you can't just like, even like 2 or 3 times a week exercise. I'm doing exercise now, but I think you should build exercise and stretching and things into your whole day as much as possible. Like Ido Portal, he's talking about movement a lot of the time, because you have to embrace exercise, otherwise it's just a chore and you'll never be long term.
Yeah, I agree with that, because my life was, one of constant physical exercise and enjoy of it. But bear in mind, we're not all made the same. So some people are simply genetically designed to sit at a desk and work a keyboard. Other people are just, through no fault of their own, just lazy sods. It's just the way God made them. And so, it takes all sorts to make a world. They've got this ridiculous woke expression, what's it called? Fat shaming. And I understand that it's not a great thing to be grossly overweight for your health, but it's also not a great thing to sit in moral judgment of people because they're different from you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do enjoy. I think I enjoy junk food more if I'm with a overweight person, just because it's their thing, and like it's always more. There's great enthusiasm when you're around, 12 square ribs or a Big Mac, and it's their deal.
Yeah, I avoid all that food like the plague. I really do, because it is the very worst food in the world, and it's just sugar, salt, and fat, and it just it's Moorish. Chocolate is Moorish. I tell my wife not to buy chocolate because it talks to me from the cupboard, and I can't resist it. So if it's not in the house, I can't eat it. It's a bit like, people who sit in front of the TV and eat biscuits and send out for pizza. If they didn't have a telephone and the biscuits weren't in the house, then they couldn't eat it. But once it's there, it talks to you. And so we've got if we can't avoid listening to the food, we've just got to make sure it doesn't come into the house in the first place.
Going circling a little bit back to Ukraine, I was actually in Ukraine when the war started,
Mm.
and I've been through quite a lot of emotions. The first time the nuclear power plant was threatened, I actually had my first two panic attacks one night. I woke up and I had like saliva coming through my mouth. I couldn't control it. It was. I mean, I wasn't really too worried about it when it happened, but it was sort of subconscious thing, and so that got me into this whole prepping mindset thing, and I started making videos about prepping and survival. And I've studied a lot about this, and it's given me a really deep respect for the professionalism of just the army, the British Army, the amount of thought that goes into all this, how to survive in the field in various conditions and weather, operating weapons and cleaning the weapons and discipline. It is such a whole other world, the military, to me now.
Yeah, it's a set of skills, and they take years to learn. And I remember going camping once with my family and some other families up in Shell Island in North Wales, and there I was with a pup tent and some hexamin burners and some mess tins, and I was cooking for the family, and everybody else was glamping with their vans and their tables and chairs and everything. And they said, "Is this survival?" I went, "No, I'm just cooking dinner." Things that I just took completely for granted. How to light a fire. You'd be
Yeah.
amazed how many people can't light a fire, and if they do, they don't know how to burn a fire so that it burns for a long, long time rather than just goes up in quick flames and disappears. How to keep warm, how to make shelter, how to insulate yourself from the cold, how to make waterproofs out of materials you find on the ground. There's so many things you pick up over the years, and but people in modern world, they don't know how to kill an animal. They don't know how to skin, gut, eat meat that they've killed themselves. They don't know how to farm. They don't know how to grow vegetables. They don't know anything. They rely totally on their employers and Tesco. That's what they
Mm.
live on, and they can't live without it. So if we do have a huge catastrophe, it's going to be the desert people of Africa that survive, the people living in the trees in Brazil that survive, not us, because we rely totally on our technology to stay warm and to stay fed.
Mhm. Yeah, I think every British garden should have a victory garden ongoing now. I think there should be a means tested tax for food storage for a nuclear winter, maybe 1 or 2%, because if there is a Mad Max scenario like that, your biggest threat becomes your neighbour, especially if you're a hoarder of food, they'll come after you. So if there was an agreed location everybody knew in your town, this is where we have 10 years worth of food for everybody, then there wouldn't be a societal lockdown. And I worked it out. If you go on Amazon right now to, it's a sort of Norwegian ration thing, you can spend 7,000 euros and you can have 7 years worth of food for one person. Now that's a lot of money, of course, but that's because it's a private company, and that's. But if there was economies of scale and a government thing, you could potentially cover everybody for a nuclear war for maybe 2,000 each per person. That would be a good tax. That would take a lot of leverage away from dictators with nuclear weapons. If we can all survive a nuclear war, it takes away a lot of leverage.
I think it sounds like a great movie. It sounds like a novel, but the reality is that if some great catastrophe, doesn't have to be a nuclear war, if a comet hit the Earth tomorrow, you know, um, a great catastrophe will happen. Billions of people will die. Some, fortunately, will survive in remote areas, and civilization hopefully will begin again. But to worry about it instead of just living your life and getting the most out of it that you can while you're here is a mistake. It's a bit like constantly
Well, I wouldn't
spending all
say
your
worry
money in
about it. I would just
insurance.
say have
Right.
an insurance policy, because they were fallout
I don't think
shelters
you
were a big thing.
I don't think you can insure against catastrophe. You can insure against a problem. You can
Mm,
insure against your house catching fire, but you can't insure against nuclear war other than make sure you've got strong defences and that you have a sufficient deterrent
mm,
to make the other person think again, which is what the Cold War did. It's what nuclear weapons did. They made people on every side so frightened that they know that they're going to die and their families are going to die should they ever step over the line and use them. And that's the situation. I refuse to live in fear. I refuse to worry about everything. I try to persuade other people not to not to spend their lives worrying about what might happen, and not to be led by by their imaginations, but more to be led by their information. The problem is we don't get good information anymore.
mhm. Well, for me, the ultimate, it's not really insurance policy, but my faith keeps me strong, even in the faith of nuclear Armageddon, because I've made my peace with God already. So, and I think I actually probably should start evangelizing him more, just because if something does happen, I'll regret not have been sharing to people, like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm very much of the same feeling and light without being attached to a religion. I've prayed. I pray in temples. I've prayed in Catholic and Protestant churches. I've prayed in mosques because I believe in a deity, but I certainly don't believe in a religion because I find them divisive and they're run by men. And men are looking always have the frailties of men. They're looking for power. They're looking for advantage. I mean, you've only got to drive through the Midwest in the USA to discover how corrupt and wrong the religious structure is when it's just trying to take money off people.
I'm sorry that your experience has been disappointing that way. It's not too uncommon that thought process. So I'm just going back to your career again. I noticed I saw a picture in one of your podcasts. I think it was with another former commando. I think it's same age as you, but I saw this picture with you and uh, Princess Diana and Prince Charles,
King Charles now, yeah.
King Charles, yes. And so, what was happening there?
They after we'd done the Iranian embassy siege in 1980 and rescued 19 hostages, it became popular for VIPs to come to Hereford to visit us and to see what we did. And it was a bit of a fun day out for VIPs. And Charles and Diana came to visit us and to wear the overalls and to watch us practice our skills and drills, which they enjoyed very much.
I heard a story of like one VIP. I don't know if it was Margaret Thatcher came and trained with you guys, and you guys used like live ammunition and stuff like that. Was it?
Well, I don't recall Margaret Thatcher coming to Hereford during my time.
Yeah.
Lots of VIPs did, and yeah, we would put them into a room called the Killing House
Uh-huh.
behind a safety barrier, which was just pretty much a piece of string, and then four of us would enter the room, and there would be a one of our team members sitting in a chair, surrounded by targets, and the men would enter the room and fire very rapidly a short burst of 9mm ammunition into each target. So you'd run into the room, kill all the targets, grab the person, run out the room, and everybody would just be shocked by the speed and immediacy of and the effect of what we'd actually done. So yeah, live ammunition was normal. We would actually stand in darkened rooms, not completely dark, with gas masks on, and stand our partners with their shoulders touching targets, and we would have to turn, draw, and shoot, and hit the target while their shoulders were touching the target. and build up that level of confidence and accuracy in what we did.
And was there ever a VIP in between those targets, or
Oh no, you wouldn't put them there. No,
right?
you have to also have the confidence to stand still. So yeah, it's cutting edge. I mean, you've got to train with fear. You've heard of Malcolm Gladwell, wrote
No.
Tipping Point and Blink and What the Dogs Saw. He's a Harvard, a very very famous writer. Anyway, Malcolm Gladwell wrote Blink, and he talked about why people pull the trigger, policemen particularly, when they shouldn't do. And he came to the conclusion after a lot of research that the mind cannot make minor cognitive decisions when the heartbeat goes over 145 beats per minute. So
I see.
if your heart's going over, why do sportsmen make more mistakes towards the end of a match? It's because they can no longer, the heartbeat's high, they can no longer make those minor cognitive decisions. And so when you see someone like the police officers who were overweight charging down into the underground in London, looking for a terrorist that they thought was carrying a bomb, when they saw Charles de Menendez and shot him, it's because their heartbeat was over 145 beats a minute and they couldn't think clearly. So what sends your heartbeat up? Well, being unfit does, for a start. Excessive amounts of exercise, and then fear. So you have to train on the edge of fear in order to not to have that effect, and you have to be extraordinarily fit not to have that effect. So the training combined with the extremely high fitness create a situation where you're not frightened in a very, very serious situation. You're thinking clearly and you do the right things.
What is a sort of realistic oldest age that somebody could join the SAS if they wanted to do it?
Well, I knew guys,
from Civvy Street.
Well, the average, you can't join from Civvy Street for a start.
All right, yeah.
You have to, well, I'm not sure of the rules now, but I would imagine they're the same. You had to serve 3 years with a regular unit before you could volunteer. And when you volunteered, then you had to pass the selection, of course. But the average age of people getting into the SAS during my time was 27. And I got in just before my 22nd birthday. So I was one of the youngest to get in there. But I knew guys that did selection up to the age of about 33, 34 and passed. Because it's not just about being fit. In fact, the fitness is a huge part of it, but it's not all of it. You have to be a soldier first before the fitness plays in. It's a bit like an international footballer. He has to be an athlete, but he has to have all the skills to go with it. Otherwise, he's just good at running around the field.
And what's interesting, what you said was in the other podcast, was that the SAS is very individualistic, whereas it's very much I won't say sheep mentality, but the sort of pack mentality in the army, in a sense. You're one of the wholes, many.
Yeah, it's definitely in the British Army. It's definitely not the sheep mentality, because soldiers are encouraged to take initiative and to work and prepare themselves for the rank above, and that initiative extends all the way down to the senior private. What was the question again?
Yeah, so that was the first time I've ever heard of a special forces operator.
Yeah, I got it.
Individualistic like that, and I just
would
like to know more about that.
Yeah, I was a paratrooper, and basically you live on the buddy system, so you're constantly supporting your comrades because they may have a bad day today, but you'll have a bad day tomorrow, and you're built as a team. But as SAS soldiers, you're selected as individuals. You're selected to work alone. You're selected to manage. You're selected as an individual, and you're expected to take huge amounts of responsibility on your own shoulders and make decisions for yourself. Now,
I always thought the SAS was deployed as a part of a group.
Sometimes sometimes it does. The thing about the SAS is it was formed as a raiding and reconnaissance unit. And technically, that's still what it is. The the hostage rescue thing came in the 1970s after the Munich disaster with the Israeli athletes that were killed by Palestinians at Munich, and the failure of the police to rescue them. So that's an additional thing. The undercover work in Northern Ireland became part of their role as well. But essentially, when you go back to basics, they're small teams of men working in fours and fives behind enemy lines, doing reconnaissance, gathering information, and doing hearts and minds operations.
Mm-hmm. And they can project force much greater multiples than themselves as well.
That's not really the main role. If they need force, then they go back with that information and they combine with the infantry or the navy or the artillery, and they bring that force in from elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, going back to the retirement in the army, so the army is it's a professionals. Every soldier is pretty much a professional. It's very highly skilled. Why do you think that there's so many people that are veterans that are homeless, that are struggling, their lives are falling apart, not supported by by their peers or their families or friends or the government? Why do you think there's just a lot of people that are struggle after being in the forces?
Yeah, I mean, I think the armed forces has changed over the last 50 years of my life. It used to be a vocation. You signed up, and you could expect to stay for 22 years, whether or not you were promoted in your regiment, and you were proud of that. It became your substitute family. It became your home. And we had garrison towns where generation after generation of soldiers had existed. And so the civil society that surrounded that, the Salians, the clubs, the support systems were all there in those garrison towns. The military hospitals, they were all there. All that's gone on the basis of saving money and accountancy, and it's almost impossible to get it back. And so we got a huge. Okay.
Okay, so you're mentioning differences with garrison towns in the past.
Yeah, we used to have garrison towns like Aldershot and Colchester, where you had generations of soldiers, and you had lots of societies that had been built up by the previous generations. You had clubs, you had support structures, you had wives' clubs, you had all the aunties and uncles that you didn't the pseudo aunties and uncles that belonged there. And so all the structures were there. People didn't need to go outside. They didn't need to go to social services. They had people to talk to about their problems, who understood their problems from their personal involvement in those problems. And you had the regiment to fall back on, the associations that provided support after people had left too. With the government continually cutting back on the armed forces and breaking them up and restructuring them, the armed forces now is not so much a lifestyle or a vocation, it's more of a job. So people do it, they do it for a short period of time, they move on. It's cheaper to train new soldiers than to keep old ones. And that structure has broken down. But the army also used to provide housing for the families and support structures afterwards. But so did the government. Now, the housing issue, as far as veterans are concerned, isn't really just a veterans issue. It's a national housing issue. And housing in the UK, homelessness in the UK, is a massive problem that can be cured. If we look at the Finnish example of housing first, and then the social problems and dealing with them after you've housed people, they've reduced their housing down to homelessness problem down to almost zero. And we could do that. So rather than sitting in judgment of people that can't shelter themselves and find a home and find an address and get a job, first you provide the housing, then you worry about the rent, then you worry about them getting a job. And some won't be able to cope, and some will always be a problem, but you will get rid of the fact that people are dying on the streets and living in cardboard boxes and causing huge problems with health costs and everything else that goes with it. I mean, the classic example is Los Angeles in the USA, where they've got streets full of people who could be housed by the richest country in the world, but they won't house them because they think it's their fault. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes bad things happen to bad people too. But housing first, shelter first, and then worry about the social problems afterwards. And soldiers and ex-soldiers are part of that much bigger picture.
And you're quite involved with the veterans in Northern Ireland, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, we've been fighting for the last 6 years to stop the persecution and prosecution of former British soldiers who served in Northern Ireland. And they were being used as political pawns for the agenda of the political parties in Northern Ireland, very much like a tennis ball being hit backwards and forwards between loyalists and Republicans. So we kept out of Northern Ireland politics, but we spent a lot of time and created a lot of support to pressure the government into introducing a new legacy bill, which is going to stop those malicious and vindictive prosecutions for political purposes. The bill was supposed to be read in the House of Lords just recently, but it was due a couple of days after our sovereign queen's death. So it's been rescheduled, and we're not quite sure when yet. But the prosecutions have in fact stopped in anticipation of this new bill that's going to happen anyway, because it would be foolish to start them when it's going to get thrown out. But in spite of that, all these political prosecutions that have been paid for by the British taxpayer all of them have resulted in no guilty verdicts whatsoever over the past 20 years, not one. And so that's how disgraceful and disgusting it is that a man who serves 22 years with the armed forces honourably then gets dragged back to Northern Ireland by armed police to interrogated 24 times in 3 days and told that his house had been searched for evidence from 40 years before. I mean, that's how ridiculous and appalling the situation is. And unless people stand up for their rights and club together and organise, then these things are allowed to happen, and they mustn't happen.
Thanks for supporting our forces like that.
It's not the attacks from the enemy that you're up against that are the really hard thing. When you're leading a campaign like that, it's the attacks from the people on your own side that hurt the most.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll be following that. So you went to university for this master's, and actually writing something that I would like to do eventually, but it's just finding the time to do it. But what kind of, I think you're focusing on children's literature at the moment, I believe.
No. I wrote my autobiography, Fighting Scared, before I went to university, and it took me 6 years to write it.
Right.
And I realised that it was a bit like a carpenter trying to put up shelves compared to me putting up shelves. It would take me 6 attempts and 16 hours to put up a set of shelves, and a carpenter it taking 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And because he had the skills. So when I actually improved myself and got some of those skills, I then decided to set out to write some more books. So as a fun thing, I wrote the Wise Old Paratrooper trilogy, which are 3 books, which are anthologies of short stories, poetry, maxims, and funny stories, mostly about my military experiences. And one's in maroon, one's in blue, and one's in green, which are the 3 colour patches, DZ flashes of the parachute regiment battalions. And last year I published a illustrated book of my own poems, which is called Warrior Poet, A Soldier's Songs. I've written some children's books called Cheesy the Dog, but I haven't got around to publishing them. And I think they're crazy and they're mad. They're a bit sort of Spike Milligan-ish in their way, who's an inspiration to me where children's humour is concerned. And so I'm working on that. But I'm determined, once I've settled into my new house and we've got the work done here, that I'm going to write a novel next year. And that's all in my head. I know the whole story. But as you said, you've got to sit down and treat it as work and do it. Yeah. And that's my big plan for next year.
Yeah, so looking forward to seeing your novel. I've got a couple of novels that I'm working on in my head, but I haven't got the plot figured out yet, and they're really complicated sci-fi novels. So
Yeah.
it's one's a bit like Elysium, the other one's a sort of long single invasion in the future, just by the one guy by himself. So like, how do I make a story of like a 4 month deep invasion to enemy territory, just one guy with thoughts, like how do I write that? How did I make it even exciting? Just reminiscing about the past and everything. I don't know. Talking to
Yeah.
the robot all day long.
Well, a book's a work of art. It's like a sculpture, or it's like a piece of music, or a painting. It's layered, and you have to put the emotion in it. When I wrote Fighting Scared, I started off with a few chapters, and I showed it to my wife, and she said, "This is shite." She said, "Where's the color? Where's the feeling? Where's the emotion? What could you see when you were saying goodbye to your mother that morning when you were 15 years old? What were you carrying in your hands? What was going through your heart and your head?" And she taught me how to put the color into the painting, or the music into the song, the emotion into the song. And when you build a book, you have to do bad work before you can do good work. So you have to write crappy books before you can write good books. and the more you do it, the better you get it. I write every single day.
Oh,
I write my
fantastic.
blogs on LinkedIn every day. I put them out on Facebook and social media. And, I average over 1.5 million people see my stuff every week. And the more I write, the better I get at it.
Yeah, really, your posts are quite encouraging to somebody who spent a lot of time in Ukraine, family and friends there. Your posts are one of the most encouraging, I think, on LinkedIn, and also they're very high quality posts that you do on there. Really, when I read those posts, I think this guy's a badass, And compared to my posts, I got basically beaten up by a friend of mine because of my posts, and he's a sort of bigger brother slash I wouldn't say mentor, but he's like a really strict brother of mine in a sense, and he really beat me up about LinkedIn. He unfollowed me and everything, So every time I read my post, there'll be some rant, 2-line rant about Russia or something, and then I'll go to Robin's post and be like, "Whoa, he's really actually not lazy like me."
The wonderful thing about LinkedIn is that they give you a 400-word limit.
Yeah.
So you have to say something important and interesting in 400 words, which is quite a challenge. One of the first things I learned at uni was with creative writing was to remove superfluous adjectives, too many describing words. And when I learned to speak Czech, there is no such word as the in the Czech language.
Right.
And so you suddenly realize that you're using the in the English language so many times that you don't need to use it. And we have had rather than we have or we had. So you can start to cut down. And as you cut down the superfluous word use, you actually find that the writing is tighter and actually flows better, and it's more interesting too. They're the real skills you get out of studying with clever people.
Yeah, I always struggled with English at school, and even today, I was writing Scottish down, and I spelled it with one T. Can you believe that? And I was so embarrassed. And I was at a swin farm in Scotland, and I was ordering, like, I don't know. Yeah, we're just talking about, and I spelled Scottish as Scotish, and my mum would throttle me if she saw me make that mistake. So what's
Well,
listening to this
I think
podcast?
that's a bit of Glasgow creeping in, because in Glasgow it doesn't have any T's in it at all, does it? It's Scottish.
Yeah. Scottish, yeah. When I'm writing, I tried one of those Chrome extensions. I think it was Grammarly, and I can't seem to break free of this writing in passive voice. It's like has been doing this. I don't know. I can't get my mind into this different active voice.
Yeah, there's some really good studies on that. There's some really clever people. Stream of consciousness, where you're actually in the moment talking. So you're in the person's mind rather than actually telling a story. That's quite clever. Yeah. So you actually put yourself in the thoughts of the person. So it's stream of consciousness.
I was thinking about it the other day, actually. What would be a first person novel be like? I feel like going here, I'm walking here.
Yeah, yeah. It's much easier to tell it in the second person with the he and she and the you. But yeah, there's lots of different styles of writing, and you have to go out there and have a look at them and then try to copy them,
Yeah.
because they expand your ability to tell stories quite
Mm.
dramatically. Yeah, I did quite a few, and but I do like to get back into the basic storytelling system, but
Hmm.
run three storylines together and bring them together at a certain point. A bit like a television program where you across the police inspector and then across to the criminal and then across to the woman driving down the road in the car, and all three of them come together at a certain point in the story. So you've got three stories that you're telling together, which is the real skill of a novel, and to create the characters. If you're writing something that's true, then you know the characters.
Do you think that a book should be written once you've got the whole story in your head, or can the writing the book be an adventure in itself, and that you don't know what the next chapter will be, and you're just writing it?
No, I think you've got to have a plan, and you've
Yeah.
got to sit down and you've got to work out the plan. So you've got your start and your finish, and then you've got to fill in the gap in the middle. But you've got to know where you want to begin, who you want to begin with, and you want this conclusion at the end. I don't like stories without a conclusion at the end. I don't think most people do. And then you've got to
Right.
fill in the gap in the middle and then break that gap up into pieces, into highs and lows, so that the story rises and falls and rises and falls
Yeah.
in order to get you to that particular target. But if you imagine the detective movies where you've got the big map on the wall, you can do that with your characters, so that because you have to remember that you gave them blue eyes and a Birmingham accent, and they were 5'2", because you can't suddenly appear with that person later in the story and talk about his Liverpool accent, because every reader is going to say, hang on, this book is now garbage because you just changed this person from
Yeah.
a Brummy to a Scouser. Or you said he had brown eyes, now he's got blue eyes. Which one is it? And you blow the whole thing out of the water. And you
Yeah.
have to remember where you left them in their three different storylines and create a map so that you're coming together at a concluding point at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, and write it out. And then you can break it into chapters. So it's a Mount Everest, but you've broken it into different ridge lines. So you don't have to worry about the end. You know the end's there, it's the top of the mountain, but
Mm-hmm.
just worry about that ridge line there, and gradually build it. And when you built it, then you have to rewrite it. And then you have to break it down, and then you have to rewrite it. And if you're lucky, you'll get a publisher to show an interest, and then an editor will rewrite it again. And then your sculpture will take place.
One of my
Take
favorite,
shape.
I've actually been through the Dune unabridged audiobook about 6 times. It's about 30 hours. And
Yeah, true.
what I really liked about the audiobook was that they had different actors in it, and that really brought a lot of dimension to the experience. So they had this actor for the Baron Harkonnen, which he had his really deep, throttily sounding voice, and it really
Yeah,
brought this character out of it.
yeah.
The one in the new movie, I wasn't scared of him at all, but this one in the book, when you listen to it, it's like,
No, I mean, he got slated, but George Herbert's Dune, the film, the first one,
I
I
enjoyed it.
just, I thought it was amazing.
I
I
was like
loved
10
it.
or
And that was,
something.
I got the book and I saw the film when I was about 17 years old. That's how old that is.
Yeah,
So futuristic, folding space. You know, the Bene Gesserit nuns, the Messiah story, the politics. I thought it was absolute genius. I loved it. Patrick
yeah,
Stewart in the film too. There,
yeah.
never changed his haircut.
That actually, I don't know if you know about that. See, when they were doing the shield fighting, that
Mm,
effect was actually filmed frame by frame with plastic thing on top of the. So they didn't actually have the computer graphics to do that. They physically cut out orange
yeah,
pieces of material and put it on top of the
yeah,
frame and took a picture of it. That's how they did the shield
yeah.
fighting. You know,
One of the phrases from that film stayed with me right through my life, and it was very poignant and appropriate for me,
fear.
which was "Fear is the mind killer.
Yeah,
Fear is the mind killer. I must control the fear."
yeah,
And that was such a relevant. just such an important piece of that story. And it's that I remember I saw the film when I was 17, read the books. I read all the 12 books, but that stayed with me right through my life. Fear is the mind killer.
I would actually say that is true, but there's an even worse level above that, and I think that is hatred, because and Jesus taught that. He says you got to forgive people, because hatred, it doesn't eat the person you're hating, it eats you. So hatred for me is the mind killer, you know.
Yeah, hatred. I struggle. I have hated people from time to time, but it's energy sapping. It drains you. It wears you out. I mean, I've known people with so much energy where hatred's concerned that they're phenomenal, because they can hate for their whole lives. I don't know where they get the strength to do that from, but it destroys them. I've had reason to hate people, and gradually, as time passes, you let it go. I don't so much forgive as forget, but there we are. That's I'm happy with that.
Okay, Robin, we've had a lot of internet trouble, which is normal with home recording, remote podcasting. But thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And of course, I'd love to have you on the show again. There's so many more questions I have to talk about. But just wonder if you had any closing thoughts for us.
Yeah, well, it's be great to come back in a month or two and see how the situation in Ukraine develops. And I suppose that if I want to put a message out there, it's never let the bastards get you down.
Indeed. And everybody, I recommend you go check out Robin's book, I think Fighting Scared, and check out his website. What's your website address again?
RobinHorsfall.com.
That makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate
No
it's been
E in
really fun.
There's no E in Horsfall.
All right, okay, cool. Well, I guess we'll see you on LinkedIn, and people can also follow you on LinkedIn. I'll leave the links to all those things on the show notes. Yeah. So thanks again, Robin, and catch you later, okay?
Thanks, Nick. Good night.
Good night.